So this is a comparison of the Strymon Big Sky and the Helix Reverbs. This is my clean tone. It's a 5153 50 watt head into an Egnator Tourmaster 4x12 with vintage 30s. So, I'm going to start off with the Hall algorithm. Helix first. These are stock settings, except that I've turned trails on and I've set the mix to 50%. And over to the Big Sky. So hopefully you can hear that the Helix is much brighter and harsher sounding right off the bat. It also does not seem to decay as long as the Big Sky. So Big Sky and Helix. So the decay value on the Helix reverbs, 3.5, doesn't necessarily correspond to anything that you're going to see on the Big Sky. The Big Sky is just about 2 seconds and is much longer than the Helix. So let's crank up the decay a little. Maybe 6.2. Over to the Big Sky. See, they seem much closer now. So let's try and dial in the Helix to sort of lose some of the harshness. So really, all we get is a low cut and a high cut. We get pre-delay. I'm not really going to play with that because I'm going to leave the Strymon pre-delay alone. So in terms of crafting the tone, you can get into having a parallel path and adding pre and post EQ and all of that stuff. I'm just going to stick with the low cut and the high cut. So I'm going to bring the high cut down to about 1 kilohertz. And the difference, you can hear that that's a lot darker now and a fair amount of the harshness has gone. I'm just going to default that high cut again. And there it is. Bring it back down. Again, 1 kilohertz. So we start to get more of a darker character. Go back to the Big Sky. Now the Big Sky seems like it doesn't have as much low end as the Helix. At which point we can look through the parameters on the Big Sky and we get control over the low end. We get control over the mids. And we also get an option for the size. With the Hall, we can choose between concert and arena. I'm just going to stick with concert because arena is probably closer to the chamber algorithm on the Helix. You get boost. You could turn on whether the reverb persists after you change preset. Don't need to mess with that. Hold is a cool function that the Big Sky has where you can play a chord and sustain the reverb tail Really useful for ambient sounds. But yeah, pretty much it's low end, mid, size for this particular algorithm anyway. So one of the things that the Big Sky has that the Helix does not is modulation. So that is our Big Sky. I'm going to turn up the decay a little bit so we can get a nice long tail. And now I'm going to turn up the modulation about halfway. You can kind of hear that you get a little bit of shimmering chorus on the reverb tail. Turn it up full. It's very apparent when you turn it up full, but it doesn't swamp the tone of the reverb at all. So here's with it at minimum. And then we can turn it all the way up again. And if we play... kind of helps give the reverb a little animation to the sound. You don't really get that option with the Helix. Now, I'm not saying that the Helix sounds bad at all, because it patently doesn't, but it's kind of just a stock reverb sound. There's not much that you can really do to it, and it's a little limiting. Let's open up the filters fully wide, so we're not filtering the reverb at all at this point, and let's crank up the decay. Let's just go all the way. That tells you something about the nature of the Hall algorithm. It's very resonant, and what I'm hearing is my higher notes tend to create these pitches in the tail that sometimes can be a little unpleasant. That's why the high cut is incredibly useful. When you bring it down to about 1 kilohertz or even less, crank that decay back up, do a similar thing. Way less harsh than it was previously, so that's kind of my tip for any of the reverbs on the Helix. Make sure you use your high cut, and the stock settings are not the ones to use. I think most of the time they're too high. Low cut, you can do a similar thing, bring that up to about 400 hertz, whack the decay up all the way again. And that helps to clear out some of the low the lows. Obviously that's a ridiculous reverb tail, atmospheric, but if you want something kind of realistic, keep the decay low. Over to the Strymon. Let's do a similar thing. Let's put the decay up full. We've got this tone parameter that I haven't really touched so far. I'm gonna roll that down a little bit to kind of get a darker character. So hopefully you can hear with the Big Sky, when you bring the tone control down, the tail of the reverb gets progressively darker, and that can be really useful for having long tails that don't totally swamp the mix, because the Big Sky is at 50% there as well as the Helix, but the Big Sky is a lot clearer and you can still hear what I'm playing, even though the reverb tail was pretty crazy. So bring the modulation down. Maybe we could cut the mids, boost the lows, go back to that long tail, boost the tone, and sort of take a different approach. That one, you can hear it doesn't get darker really, it just sort of decays away more or less naturally. I mean, that's a ridiculous reverb tail anyway, but I think you could probably hear that the Big Sky just sounds more detailed. Let's reset these parameters. Back to Helix. So that's a little run through of the Hall algorithm on each of these units. I personally prefer the Big Sky, but that's because I tend to like really heavily ambient reverbs. I kind of like to drench my guitar in that stuff. Helix is more than serviceable. It's not like you would never use them. Again, that sounds quite nice. Just depends on what kind of flavour you prefer. I like more detail in the tails that the Big Sky gives me, but I'm happy to use the Helix. Next video, I'll compare plate reverbs.